Welcome to the Zachrilege Cast podcast, YouTube video interview program that features Zach Law, that's me, having trouble standing up because I wanted to show off my awesome t-shirt, talking to some of the best and brightest in the atheist slash secular slash awesome community, or just me. This is episode number 118. I am recording live on November 1st, 2017. I would like to thank Jenica and Patrick Krell of Real Life Beyond Faith for being on last week. They are the hotness, and they talk good as well. They are on No Religion Required right this moment, recording Wednesday at 8 o'clock, a different time than usual. But it's a recorded interview, so you stay right here, okay? You just stay right here, because some listeners have asked, can you go for an hour? Well, we will see, because I'm just going to be talking. No guest tonight. So tonight I bring on myself. Once again, my late to ask people to be on the show couldn't cash a guest check. So we're going to see how this goes. Jeannie's going to be sitting in the chat room. Maybe she'll get friends, maybe not. And will throw me questions from time to time. And maybe this time I'll actually respond. Missed you last week. By the way, this is my latest beer obsession. I like to start the show by just telling people, what on earth are you drinking tonight? So this is what the beer looks like. This is what an artist's rendition of Chris Watson is right here. This is Founders Backwoods Bastard. Now I'm going to get too deep into the beer weeds here, but just going to say that Founders in Michigan is one of the best breweries in the country. They do 6 different barrel-aged beers over the year. And this is a Scottish ale, also known as a wee heavy. It's been aged in bourbon for a while. And here's the deal. So they have a beer that comes out in April called Kentucky Breakfast Stout. They have a beer called Breakfast Stout, which is basically a coffee, chocolate, oatmeal kind of stout. And it's aged in bourbon barrels for, I don't know, a year in freaking caves in Kentucky. What's cooler than that? Well, when that beer comes out, it's gone in like 5 minutes. You can't get more than a couple of bottles. Well, this beer comes out probably just as limited, and I scoured all the stores in Atlanta to get some, and I found my local Total Wine, 2 locations, had them. Now they sell them 1 4-pack at a time. So I've been going to the store like once or twice a day and buying my 1 4-pack of beer that I can. And I even asked the manager today, I was like, dude, can I just buy like what you have? And he's like, no. So I'm just going to keep going back to that store until I'm out, and I'll have a nice stash. You know, when you need to beer hibernate, you need beer. And a beer that's a seasonal beer that I save for later, and this is probably even more desserty than the beer I had before, is Death by Coconut from Oscar Blues, which is an Irish-style porter. So basically, stout is just a more alcoholic porter. That's all it is. And this is a coconut one. And I actually have a friend of mine who's allergic to coconut. So if he drank this, he probably would literally die. So that's a great story. Not the end of death tonight. So let's see. What do I have to talk about tonight? There's been a lot of talk. I feel like the last 4 or 5 guests I've had on, the focus has been on the Mythicist Milwaukee Conference and the people they invited and the reactions people had to it. And of course, I've been thinking, gosh, wouldn't it be nice to not talk about it? But of course, last week, we got to talk about it again. And there is this whole thing, you know, is the atheist movement dead? And of course, it's kind of a dumb thing because there really isn't. I know we want there to be a movement. I know we want there to be, imagine the power of every atheist in the country or in the world gathering together to try to make the world a better place. Would be lovely. Well, we don't agree on everything. And that's totally okay. So there are still atheists, and for as dumb as our squabbles can seem to be, and also times feel too serious, the God side is always going to be much less compelling point of view, seeing as it has 0 evidence. So we're always going to stick with the atheist side. It's just we're not going to always get along. I did want to talk because my iPhone got updated. So now the way my podcasts are set up is it's basically an alphabetical order. And it doesn't tell me the podcasts that I've listened to episodes of as opposed to the ones I'm subscribed to. So sometimes you'll click on it and they'll go, sorry, didn't have it downloaded. And it's a pain. And it reminds me of the shows that I have on a regular rotation and then the ones that I listen to occasionally. One of the shows I listen to occasionally is The Thinking Atheist with Seth Andrews. And I was thinking about this whole concept of listening to shows and then stopping listening to shows. And do you stop listening to the show because you find something about the host disagreeable? Do you just lose interest in the show? Or, was it one thing? Because it does seem like a lot of the people who are kind of bashing on each other right now seem to decided based on one thing, this person is out, which is everybody's prerogative to do. It's totally cool. I stopped listening to The Thing Atheist, I think just because, I don't know, I've listened to, he's probably the last atheist podcast that I actually binge listened to from the start, and I probably listened to 100 episodes. I don't even know where he is right now. What is he in? 300 episodes? I mean, let's just face it. There's the sheer volume of atheist podcasts basically tell you where the movement is right now. If it's fractured, that's fine. It's still a thing. And it kind of sucks that while I'm sipping, nobody is there to fill in the gap. This beer is good. I like this beer. I'm going to be drinking it for a long, long time. I mean, I don't know. I listened. So the Thinking Atheist episode this week was basically Seth Andrews asking a question, is the atheist movement dead? And the pretty obvious answer was, of course it's not. He's still a little too fixated on the whole outrage brigade, the people who get mad. But I don't blame him in a way because, and this goes for another podcaster that I'll bring up in a few minutes. He makes a living doing this. And that makes a big difference as to how you approach your show. I have 3 patrons and bringing $10 a week for this show. I am not even really pushing for any more. In fact, the 3 patrons I have are the ones I had at the beginning. And they've probably forgotten that they signed up for it. And if I'd reminded them, I remind them every week. Interesting. If I reminded them, they might just be like, okay. But because it's a recurring thing, they're just like, whatever. But if you're doing this as a living, you have to consider your audience. What do they want? You have to talk to the cheap seats in a way. And you have to kind of straddle the middle in a way, or pretend that you're straddling the middle and not actually do it. But I still think overall, I like Seth. I think his voice is very soothing. I don't know. There are some of the topics I hear, I feel like can get explored in a different way by different people in more depth. And I'll always check the show out because I still like him, and I probably should reach out and try to get him on here because he's still, I think he's number one. And when you're number one, you're important. Yeah, Jeannie made the comment that my patrons don't listen anymore. The question is, did they ever? Well, when I have them on, although I've only had on the 2, the Bobby and Ashley. But I guess I want to talk about the death of a podcast for me. Now, there's a show like Atheist Experience. That was the first atheist podcast I ever listened to. Well, when it first was available for me, I really enjoyed the show. And what it was just, it was a local, I think they were on local public access. They were based out of Austin. It was like the Austin Atheist Society. And each week they'd have 2 different people on. Sometimes it'd be like a guest star, or it would just be 2 people from Austin. And they would just kind of talk about a subject really quickly, maybe 5 minutes, and then just take calls. And maybe not the majority of the calls, but the ones that were more interesting were the ones where the Christians called in. Well, you can guess how those arguments went. Like the first time you hear Matt Dillahunty basically tear a creationist's argument apart, you're just floored. You're like, wow, I didn't realize that this book that everybody reveres is actually full of shit. Why would that be the case? Well, human nature in a way. And after a while, it's a show you outgrow. I think you outgrow shows because almost in a way, these shows have to continue in the same format to keep the people coming back. And then maybe they change formats and you don't like where it goes. I just stopped listening, and I don't even remember the last time I listened to Atheist Experience. It's been quite a while, and it's just the nature of podcasting. Also, if you do interview podcasters on a weekly basis, you're listening to them. You're not listening to other people, and you sometimes forget good shows. Like you'll forget about a band you liked in the 90s and go, wow, they're still together and putting together music. Hey, they're actually still good. It's not bad. But I want to briefly talk about David Smalley and Dogma Debate. And this isn't going to be a bash fest because I think he's gotten enough bashing, deserved or not. Here, the deal is Dogma Debate was one of two podcasts that I've ever supported financially on a regular basis. The first being Quranify Me, because Paul was doing a show about Islam and there weren't that many out there. And it's still a relatively small number of shows compared to the ones that are either about Christianity, about secular or whatever, but not focusing on that religion. So I thought it was important to support that show. But then it morphed into something else, and then it kind of morphed into nothing. And Dogma Debate, I enjoyed it because I actually enjoyed the long shows back when they were 3 hours. But I enjoyed the co-hosts that he had on during his time. And I actually forgot about the first two that he had on before the good old days of Rachel and Aaron Ra. If you've never heard the episode where Rachel gets drunk and Aaron Ra debates her as he's the creationist and she's defending evolution, it's hilarious. And you notice I haven't mentioned David's name yet. I don't think he's necessarily bad at what he does. I just I don't know. I just it kind of dropped off. I mean, these were 3-hour shows, and well, damn, there was a 4-hour one. And he did the 24-hour podcast-a-thon where they raised money for charities, and they made, 5 figures for the Secular Student Alliance, Camp Quest, may have been Foundation Beyond Belief. And I wonder if it's going to keep going this year, because David moved to LA, got into Podcast One, so he's kind of become a big league podcaster. But in the transition, these co-hosts like Lydia and like Alex Jules, and let's not forget John Karp, who tragically passed away a couple years ago. These people kind of helped him make this transition. And then he initially, of course, had a full-time job, lost the job, and made the show into his full-time job, and just lost interest. I mean, it's kind of ironic that he got to interview Adam Carolla, because Adam Carolla's show was a show I listened to. I won't quite say religiously, but he used to do like a 4-hour radio show, and I'd listen to it every day, like the entire show. And then he lost the radio gig, started his podcast. I listened to his podcast every day. Well, it doesn't matter how funny or entertaining or how great your content is. You might get tired of listening to someone's voice after a while. And then Adam Carolla got a little right-wingy, did the right-wing talking points of, hey, you can lift yourself up by your bootstraps like I did, because he grew up poor and he made it big time. And I feel like David might be leaning that way. He might be leaning in the way of, let me go against the quote-unquote atheist mainstream, the straw man whining liberals at colleges type people who don't really exist, but sort of exist, sort of the SJW type of attack. And so I used to support them, and he switched from a direct payment system to Patreon, and he just sent me an email. Well, his company sent me an email saying, hey, you used to support us, why not? And I just sent him a message when he defended the people who cheered at MythCon for Carl's comments for the tweet about I wouldn't even rape you. he defended the people, and sure, there's a nuanced argument that could be made, but you know, I'm kind of done with that whole tweet. It's the person who came up with it is less intellectual and creative than he thinks he is, and all I feel like is being done is it's just stirring up a bunch of resentment that people have that aren't necessarily based in reality. There's some reality there, there's some not. But it just said the kind of person who's defending this is not the kind of person I want to donate my money to. And honestly, a lot of these shows, you know, this Patreon setup is you set up a recurring monthly payment. Well, you don't even notice it's there after 2 months. If you had to consciously go in and every month do it, I don't know how many people would do it. How many people would be that dedicated to shows? It's really hard to get constant, feedback on shows. I'm gonna go ahead and open my beer now, even though it's not quite, ready to put in yet. It's just pretty. I like my beers dark. What can I say? And I'm glad Jeannie's drinking too. I did want to mention an episode of, I guess that's a YouTube video that I watched. So we all know Eli Bosnick pretty well. Well, we know him as the version of him that's on The Scathing Atheist and God Awful Movies. And I think Citation needed pretty much the same character. And it's a character that he plays. He plays the kind of out-of-control, wacky sidekick guy who often jokes about digging up the corpse of Phyllis Schlafly and having sex with her and saying something about children and sex, which is pretty inappropriate, but in the basically comedy form of it being a joke, it's on the edge, clearly. But that's not who he is as a person. Eli clearly has a lot of empathy, and sometimes it might come off as too much empathy, because when he and Thomas Smith had on the MythCon leaders after that conference, and he talked about the tweet, the I wouldn't even rape you tweet, his response was very emotional, and you could tell he was on the verge of tears, and it wasn't a produced or a fake thing. Thank you, Jeannie. It was funny maybe half the time. Sometimes that's tough with new comedy. You get a reaction on something and you just got to keep banging away at it until it's so not funny that you don't remember why it was funny to begin with. But anyway, Eli was upset because he felt, in a way, partially responsible for what happened there, because he did initially say, hey, MythCon, give him a chance. Let's try this out. And then once we heard the tweet mentioned and the reaction to it, he basically said that he felt bad that this came out and that women didn't feel comfortable in the atheist movement. And I think that's totally legitimate. I often wonder to myself, okay, so the Abrahamic religions are the dominant religions in the world. They're all very anti-women. Why are women still in there? Well, you go over to the atheist community and, well, we're kind of not terribly much better, really, when it comes down to it. So you can see that when things like this happen, that it's pretty rough. Now, Eli Bosnick was invited to Carl's show, and I'm not going to use his official YouTube name because I think it's about as dumb as most of the arguments I hear from him are. And I heard that this thing was on, and I'm like, okay, I want to listen to someone on my side, listen to someone on the other side, and see what kind of discussion do they have. I didn't make it very far. It was a 4-hour show. And as Jeannie and I have agreed, long podcasts are a pain. I should really go the other way. My wife does a show, and it's like 20 minutes every week. God, that's a good idea. Do a nice, easy, bite-sized version. I got through about 45 minutes, and the problem I really had with this was that I didn't really know where Eli or Carl were coming from. I didn't get clearly stated positions, like, here's what I think. When he mentioned, Carl mentioned the James Damore, the whole Google memo thing, and Carl was very clear that he didn't think it was sexist at all. It was actually pro-women, not anti-women. Eli didn't really respond to it. He didn't really give the Thomas Smith kind of, hey, I've studied this and I know exactly what he's saying and I can talk to a bunch of scientists who think it's bunk, because I think it's bunk. And it kind of went in that direction, the really trying hard to say, let's find a way to just have a conversation. But there was a lot of interruption and talking over each other. And I've listened to so many of these shows between like Christians and atheists that you just hear people talking over each other and going, all right, I came with this great zinger that's going to destroy this person on the other side. And then they have either a prepared answer or they change the subject and it's over. So I don't know. I try to say, well, gosh, I'm sure there's something I agree with Carl on, and I agree with him that we're both atheists, and that's about it. But clearly based on not just the one tweet, but the feminism is a mental disorder, and laughing at when a feminist activist murdered their partner, that kind of stuff makes you go, I don't need to go any further. But I wanted, you get torn and you go, hey, I want to see what's going to happen here. And I want to be uncomfortable. I don't want to listen to shows where everybody agrees with me all the time because it's just boring. So let's try it. I tried it. It didn't go well. And that's that. And I'm going to move on to another section I had kind of prepared. This is something I wanted to do for a while. I just haven't had a chance because I like talking to other people more. This is basically a farewell section where I say, before this was like, well, for the most part, I'm going to talk about people who are no longer with us in the podcasting world and people who are also no longer with us. And this is based on some interviewees I had in the past. So let's just go with it. On episode 8, Dr. Jill, who was sadly the only, I think, atheist kind of podcast interview that she did. She was, at the time of the interview, the only Georgia member of the Secular Therapist Project, and she got to talk about being a therapist and talking to people who had been in kind of religious cults and how to deal with that. Unfortunately, she stopped tweeting and responding to emails a while back, so I don't know what the situation is there. But that's a pretty good episode. That's one that I still put away and go, I think that was a good one because it was on a subject that doesn't get talked about enough in interviews, and it's just cool to say, hey, I've talked to this person, and they haven't been on 50 different shows, right? Now, episode 26, I think it's appropriate that this was probably the worst audio of a show I've ever recorded. And honestly, at this point, that probably shouldn't even exist. So Chris Maley and I met over the internet like most freaks. And he's the guy who took the famous ass picture of me at ReasonCon 2 years ago. So during this show, I got him and Corin on, and at the time they were young and in love, and I don't think it's listenable now for the audio and the fact that their breakup was so disastrous, and also Chris died a few months ago. I lost track of him. We were still talking back and forth, and he just was hurting a lot. He was struggling a lot. He had to be committed. He had substance issues. He had moved back in with his mom and his brother, and he was just angry. And it was unfortunate because he was a guy who supported a lot of shows, and he kept some of these going. And it was good to have someone there you can reach out to and get a response. But it just went to a very dark place, and I'm very sad that what happened because he was a relatively young guy, had a lot of life left, but it was cut short. So episode number 39, a little less downer here. Cy Lost created a podcast called Save My Soul. I guess we were kind of kindred spirits in a way because he was in a mixed marriage. You know, he's atheist, his wife isn't. And he wanted to let out some steam. So he started this show, and his whole premise was save my soul. Like, find religion for me or give me an argument that I haven't heard before. And hey, look, we got another guest on here. So the steam apparently went out because Sai stopped doing the show. In fact, it's no longer on iTunes, and on episode 99, he did a bit of an exit interview. I believe it's the Apostle Matthew is in the chat room. In the name of God, interviewed him a while back, and I think, tell me what, I believe 300 episodes. I mean, damn, that's impressive. But let me finish here. So Sai not only stopped doing the Save My Soul podcast, it's no longer online. I actually had to have him send me an MP3 file with his last episode just so I could listen to it, so I could ask him some questions. And I'm basically going to say this: if anybody is doing an atheist podcast and says, you know what, it's just not for me anymore, let me have you on. Let's do an exit interview. I think, in a job, you do an exit interview. I think when you finish doing a podcast, you should get to do an interview and get to kind of get a closure, if closure is a thing for you. Okay, now episode 41. This is going to be another big sigh. So in this episode, I had Naomi and Neil of Unequally Yoked on. Neil was a former Mormon and Naomi remained in the fold. So their show was unique in that way because you had a believer and non-believer really talking it out in a very raw and passionate way, but they were able to continue their relationship, and they had some kids, and they just talked it out. Now, over time, and it's really hard to blame them for this, they stopped doing the show. It just was too much. Well, recently I found out through Facebook that Neil's daughter passed away, and following the saga online is just heartbreaking because it was a bit of a long process, and now they're going through, he wasn't invited to whatever Mormon chapel because he's no longer a member and that kind of stuff. I kind of hope they can get some peace anyway. Now, at this point, I think I'm going to pass on other guests who have been on, and for one reason or another, I'm not really chatting with them anymore. Maybe there was an attack video done, or there was a picture of a tampon sent to me with SJW on it in one case. We're just probably not going to get them back on the show as a guest. I'm going to tell my people in the chat room, feel free to send questions my way, but I'm going to next talk about a couple of books I've read recently. I never get to do this. I read books and then they just kind of disappear. I mean, I haven't really done. I have a blog, but I don't really do book reviews on there. I mean, lately we've been having let's say some discussions as a country about race. So I thought that why don't I read a couple of books about it? So the first one here is called Blood at the Root by Patrick Phillips. Summary: young woman is killed in the 19-teens. Black people are lynched over it, and then a few others who apparently were at the scene when this happened were sentenced to die. Now, back in this era, it was up to the local judge to determine where the hanging occurred, because that's how people got killed back then. So it was scheduled to be at a person's private property. Well, the sheriff, who clearly was in the KKK side, set up a viewing section where people can picnic and see some generally probably not guilty black folk die. The judge said to erect a fence so people can't see. Night before the hanging, the fence burns down. Oops. This was in Forsyth County, which is a few suburbs from me. It's only 30 miles away from where I live right now. And as a result of this murder, now this young woman was basically beaten to death, but They never really figured out who it was, but a lot of black people were killed because of it. And after that, all of the black people in the entire county got kicked out. Not only did they have to leave the county, basically the white people came in and either bought their property for pennies on the dollar or just flat out stole it. Now imagine this. There's a civil rights rally in Georgia, like I said, just north of me, in which local citizens throw bottles and rocks at the protesters and little kids yell the N-word. This happens not in the 60s, but 1987. The white folk in the county after this event happens claim that the people throwing rocks and the protesters are outside agitators. Does that sound familiar to you? Anytime somebody protests anything that's horrible, it's always outside agitators and not legitimate complaints. The only reason this county eventually started to get integrated was that Atlanta kept spreading wider and wider. I do recommend reading the book, listening to it. Actually, I listened to it on tape. That was a pretty good one. I say on tape. Obviously, you can tell how old I am when I say on tape. So another book in the same kind of theme is called White Rage by Carol Anderson. So the theme of this book is pretty much if people of color get any rights, white people get pissed and take action. Take the election of our first black president. The equal and opposite action was a series of laws being passed countrywide that disproportionately affected people of color and poor people. Basically a modern version of the poll tax. And now tons of people have been removed from voter rolls. And wouldn't you know it, Donald Trump won because of very small margins in a lot of states. So feel free to check that one out if you want to be really, really angry. But it also, you learn some things. I do want to, as I try to do every week, and I'll do a little earlier than usual this week, is give some love to the people who cover this show on Patreon. Patreon.com/Zachrilege, Zachrilege. And I'm not even reading that, and I'm just like barely through my first beer. So Bobby and Ashley of No Religion Required, they did poach my last guests, but I had them first, having Jenica and Patrick on their show this week. I believe they're showing it live right now, but by the way, they interviewed it in advance, so just go ahead and listen to it in podcast form later, and you'll be totally cool. I do want to say thank you again to Hugh Man, who's another one of the Patreons from the very beginning. Last week, the local Major League Soccer team, Atlanta United, had its first playoff game ever. And I asked him, because he's a season ticket holder, and he invited me to a game. Not only did he take me to the game, buy me a ticket, got me a pride scarf, because in soccer they sell scarves and people buy a lot of them. And he invited me to a tailgate, which was like 4 hours before the game. And we had a great time. So the team got into the playoffs. And I just asked him, hey, are you tailgating early? And he said he's a music teacher and he was doing a concert, so he couldn't show up till the second half. He actually contacted the guy who had the seat in front of him who couldn't make the game, and the guy gave me his ticket. So I got to go to a soccer playoff game, and I know for a lot of people they're starting to yawn, but there were 67,000 people there. It was the biggest crowd for a major league playoff game in history. And here's the difference between Major League Soccer and like the NFL, National Football League, which is the professional league in America. In the professional league, they pump in this music and they try to get you via kind of artificial means to cheer along. And it works sometimes and it doesn't work other times. Major League Soccer, they actually come up with their own songs, and they have a cheering section in the back, and they have guys playing drums. And the only time you sit down is during halftime. And yeah, it was a stereotypical soccer game in that no goals were actually scored. It went to penalty kicks, but I was sitting like 10 feet away, and it was a lot of fun. And I finally got to see you in the second half. And that's right, I've met you multiple times, and it was a lot of fun. And I enjoyed myself, although I got to get my Atlanta experience going on the sucky mass transit home, which was not very fun. I do want to mention Teode, the other Patreon. Only met him once, got invited to a birthday party that I had, and we played Centipede once, and I beat him, and we had some beers together. And I'd like to meet again because he lives local, and that'd be cool. Now I'm gonna call Marissa McCool a Patreon emeritus, because if you donate hard-earned money to this show, even if you stop and you're busy, doing a podcast, going back to school, writing 3 novels a week, well, you get mentioned forever. So love all of y'all. Yeah, the problem, Jeannie, at that game was that because there's so many people there, every time there was a break, and in soccer, the only breaks are at halftime, lines were just insane. I haven't seen a single question from the chat room, so I'm feeling very sad. Because if I don't hear, or see a question pretty soon, I'm going to have to go into my next subject, and it's going to be a little bit long, so I just want to let you know. One thing that I've done recently, and I think I did a mini version of it on a show recently, was a class on storytelling. And all that is, it's kind of halfway between stand-up comedy and performance art, where you tell a 5-minute story about something that happened to you. And really the whole point of this story is you have your beginning and end, and then you kind of fill in the middle part, and you're not really supposed to memorize. You just kind of have a general feel for what you're going to do. I miss the Apostle so much. It's just, it's I don't even know what to say. He's you've always been good to me. The whole time we've known each other, and we've known each other from ReasonCon 1. That's right. The one, the only, I don't know if that's considered like the classic one, because the first ReasonCon was kind of small, and the second one was the one where everybody showed up. But let me go ahead, and we'll see how long this story is, because this is something that happened to me about 16 years ago, and I don't know how deep I've gone into this. I'm sure I've talked about this on the show before. And I'm sure if you watch this show on YouTube, you're always wondering, like, where did he get this little tattoo right here? So imagine yourself back in July of 2001. The girl I'm dating at the time keeps an apartment in Columbia, South Carolina. And by the way, this is a good beer. Death by Coconut. Pass, hit, dash. Or you can do it in whatever order you want. Anyway, 2001. Dating a woman who keeps an apartment in South Carolina. Her family lives there. But she lives in Atlanta, where I live, of course. And we go to visit. She lives in a garage apartment above somebody's house. And it's the dirtiest place I've ever been in my life. It's dusty. There's stuff in the fridge that expired like 6 months ago. Mold in the fridge. Not a very fun experience, but it was a place to stay. Well, I wake up on day 2 of this trip to see that I have this really big pimple on my hip. And it's just god-awful. And so over the following month, it's just kind of there. And I, of course, being a non-medical professional, have popped it a couple of times, and I've seen some doctors because I'm having some issues. I do. The dark side is my beer. That's what I have. But in short, so this event happens in the middle of July. I wake up the first week in September. And I'm in a hospital bed. And I have all these people around me trying to explain to me what's happened to me. But I'm also coming out of a medically induced coma that I've been in for the past 2.5 weeks. So reality's kind of a weird thing. I find out that through this pimple, I got a staph infection, and in my left leg, I had a blood clot. And the problem with blood clots, blood clots are good things when you cut yourself trying to clean up the dishwasher, but they're a bad thing like inside your leg. It started shooting pieces into my lungs, so I was unable to breathe. So I get admitted to Emory University ICU, intensive care unit, and it's determined that I need to have surgery. I have a pool of staph infection in my spine, and a doctor has to come in and basically scrape it out and remove it all. And they do that, have this really cool scar. They put me in a coma because I can't breathe. I end up getting a tracheotomy here so they can breathe for me, feeding for me, giving me antibiotics. And after staphylococcus is what it's called. Yeah. My parents moved into the ICU and lived there for 2.5 weeks. And I have a nice folder here where I have all these stories that people who are there tell me, because in a lot of cases you want to go by firsthand experience. Well, I don't have the firsthand experience. People have to tell me, because the drugs they gave me to put me into the coma and to get me out of the coma took the memories I had from getting into the hospital. So I don't remember this. In short, they bring me out of the coma, and initially I'm acting crazy. I'm trying to kick out of the bed. I throw off my hospital robe in front of my friends and act a crazy person. And the doctors are like, I think he might be a little bit questionable. I don't know. We might need to put him back in this coma because I think there's something mentally wrong with him. And that's not the first time that's been said about me. But my mom, who was there, basically said, I think that's him. It's just the version of him when he was a little kid. And I was a pretty bad kid. So they kept me awake. And so I finally got out of the intensive care unit and got moved into a regular room, which is lovely. And one morning, my mom said to me, why don't we do something normal? So she turned on the television. And the first thing we saw was a plane fly into a building. So that was September 11th. And I had to say, did that happen? Because I was having these crazy hallucinations even after I got out of the coma. I had, with those stories, well, we'll get there. So I was having dreams that my nurse was trying to kill me. And then later my parents asked me why I was mean to that nurse. I was having dreams that I was watching TV and I was watching ESPN and a football game was on and people were getting hit and body parts were flying off. And there were these things that I saw that I really can't totally explain to other people. And so on that day, me and my mom finally had the same experience at the same time. And I guess everybody in the country had the same experience at the same time. And also on that day, I had to go in and get a PICC line installed. And a PICC line is basically a permanent IV or a long-term IV because I was getting antibiotics on a daily basis. So I went in, and the guy who wheeled me in a wheelchair basically was telling me that there were all these planes flying over from Europe and we're going to have to shoot them down. And everybody was going crazy. And in a way, I'm glad that, first of all, I wasn't really sane that day. And second of all, there wasn't social media like now on 9/11. I can't even imagine what Twitter would be like. And I went into radiology, which is a very cold room, and they were playing local radio reports and they're talking about schools being closed. And I just remember they gave me really warm blankets and they kept asking me if it hurt. And they just put a really long cord into a vein near my heart so I could get antibiotics. But I got through that experience, and about a week later, I got out of the hospital, But I actually had the discharge papers I got on that day. And they mentioned that I had a little bit of anemia, and they were going to keep an eye on it. Because at the time, I was also taking blood thinners in pill form, and they told me that if the pill didn't work, there was going to be plan B. So I got home, and my parents had lived with me, and my mom was like standing in the bathroom when I was taking a shower. Because really, when I first got up, I had a stool in the shower. I couldn't stand up. But after a few days, I was like going for little short walks. And then one day, I couldn't even walk like 10 feet. So I already had an appointment to see one of my doctors. And I just remember it being this Herculean effort for me to get out of the car with my parents and walk to the doctor's office. And the second my doctor saw me, they said, "Admit him." Yeah, my my mom, she kind of watched. I should have her on sometime. But so I got admitted back in the hospital. I had anemia. I had to get 4 units of blood. And I had a nurse in the ICU named Ivan. And I named him Ivan the Anti-Terrible because he was just very, very gentle. And it was a really weird experience being kind of loopy and out of it and kind of being able to remember that I was loopy. But after that weekend, they were like, "Yeah, you're okay." Kicked me out again. By the end of the next week, they admitted me for a third time. And going in, I really thought this was the end of me. I was finished because it was a ridiculous situation to get into in the first place. But the fact that I got out of it and then I was going to die of like anemia, red blood cell lack was just ridiculous. But the doctors finally figured it out. They gave me a drug that I felt kind of cool because it was a drug they said that cyclists used to cheat in the Tour de France, and it was called Epogen. The only problem is it's administered by shots to the stomach. And I was like, "Are you kidding me?" And of course they had to tell me because doctors love to do this. They go, "Oh, by the way, each one of these shots is like $2,000. If I got as sick as I did in 2001 now, I'd probably be bankrupt because I have the bills, and it's amazing how little I actually paid for the time I was in there. But they gave me these shots, and it worked. Exactly. Yes, don't test me. The problem was I was deathly afraid of needles back then and kind of got over it because every day I had to get blood drawn and things like that. They were saying, "Oh, by the way, the Coumadin, the plan A for the blood thinners, that isn't working out. So here's what plan B is. Plan B is you have to give yourself a shot to the stomach twice a day for the next 6 months." And I was like, I think I'm going to pass. And they were like, "Well, then you stay in the hospital." Well, okay. And the nurse was really nice. She actually told me, "Hey, you can give me the shot to the stomach. We can practice." And I'm like, "Well, there's no point to it." So basically, yeah, I had to do that for 6 months. And it's a weird experience having to do that because it becomes routine. And you're just thinking to yourself, okay, so it's routine that I'm sticking a needle in myself twice a day and I'm getting nothing, absolutely no high out of it whatsoever, nothing good. And I have a sharps container in my bathroom. But so in short, I got over that. 6 months later, off the medication. April, go to my best friend's wedding as he predicted while I was really sick. And then in May, get rid of the girlfriend. And in August, meet my now wife. And as they say, he lives happily ever after. Now, strangely enough, based on this class I took, I'm going to be telling that story, and apparently it's going to be in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution at some point once I finish writing it. So yeah, I have something very important to do right now. Actually, I don't know. Questions from the audience? Because I might have 1 or 2 things left, but I've been talking for damn near 50 minutes. Oh, it was before. It was before. Matthew, are you still in Nevada? Is that right? Still doing the Nevada lifestyle? I'm asking an actual apostle, Matthew the apostle, questions and seeing if he answers. But at this point, I'm getting nothing. Still dying, but slower. Yes. But the ultimate result is I have a few cool scars. I have some numbness in my left leg from basically waist down on the backside, and pretty much living a normal life otherwise. Not bad. Gosh, I don't even know if I have the heart to continue. I think we've done enough. I just want to say I will list 3 non-atheist podcasts I listen to, and I say you should at least try it one time. The first one is called Unscrewed, which is a show about sexuality, but it's not what I did or I did it with. It's more about the concept of unscrewing the negative view toward sexuality in our country, and it's a good one. And the host has a book coming out pretty soon, so you should try that out. A show I listen to that's local but quite good. I don't know what the deal is because I'm a major beer guy, but I don't listen to a lot of beer shows. But there's one called The Last Beer Show, and it's hosted by a friend of mine, Jason, and his buddy, and they just talk about beer. So once a month they do a show, and in the past 2 months, the episode I listened to today, I think it was episode 11, they were talking about women in beer industry. In the previous month, they were talking about African Americans in the beer industry, because it's the beer industry. It's weird. Things I'm into. Very white and male, huh? Atheist podcasting, fantasy football, beer. Intriguing. And the last show, just because there just aren't too many shows you listen to for years and years and years, I still enjoy the fantasy football show, The Audible, from Football Guys. They always get a little bit deeper. They're not just 100% football people. You get to know their personalities. It's a lot of fun. I know I have not been on any of these shows. It's very sad. Although I've had some of them on my other show, Going for Two, which normally is at this time, but sadly it had to be canceled this week. Yeah, I know. Does that mean you're going to deplatform yourself because there are too many white males out there? That's a good question that no one should ever ask. I mean, seriously. I know I have 2 people on there, but you're not getting much. By the way, this weekend I am heading to Nashville, so I might be buying Chris Watson a beer again. So we'll see. But that's going to be hanging out with the family, and possibly having a little talk about something that happened to us 16 years ago, because I am writing about it. But I do want to say, assuming I can actually find it, so next week, next Tuesday, I believe I will have on Evan Davids, who's the author of Adam and Eve, Salvation, and Yahweh's Outdated Behavior. There's a really big California free thought gathering that happened. Oh no, we have anger. Oh really? Pass. And we were going to do an interview next Monday, but it didn't work out, and we will do it soon. I had I think there are 2 of 3 people who've had more to drink than me during my show, and those were the 2 of the 4 co-hosts of For Wrath. Jennifer and Shay are going to be on really soon, so we'll have them on, and that should be a lot of fun. I already talked to my Patreon, so we can get over that. So if you want to listen to this show, follow me on Twitter @Zachrilege. Everything I say that I go, I probably shouldn't put on my normal Twitter, I put on there. I just throw it out there. Why not? So like the Zachrilege Cast page on Facebook, and send all hate mail to zachrilege.cast@gmail.com. Usually I say thanks to the guests for being on tonight, but I'm not going to thank myself. Stay safe. If you need to chat, I'm available. If you're an atheist and feel alone, you're not alone. Reach out. Let's chat and get that human connectiveness that keeps people coming back every Sunday. Stay skeptical. I love all y'all, and good night.